Thank you all for being here. My name is Miriam Heyer. I head up external affairs here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I want to welcome you all to our program, and I also want to welcome the audience who's watching online. We're live streaming this event so that people who are unable to join us in person can still participate in what is going to be a very special evening. This is the second annual memorial lecture for Dr. Yaffa Eliach. It's an honor to be able to present it here at New York's Holocaust Memorial Museum. Dr. Eliach is very important to our history. In 1990, her groundbreaking Center for Holocaust Studies, Documentation, and Research merged with this museum. Our museum was still a work in progress. We wouldn't open our doors until 1997. But that early merge and early influence shaped what would become our work, our approach, and our mission. So Dr. Eliach's materials that reside here include really 2,100 oral history testimonies. So these are survivors talking about their experiences. And this is just a sampling of the materials that we feature, but they are the ones that are really at the heart of how we present Holocaust history here at the museum. So we present the Holocaust and the history of the Holocaust as a history of individuals. We emphasize the personal experiences, and we try, as Dr. Eliach really showed all of us, to emphasize not only how people died, but also how they lived. So it's truly an honor to be able to present a program that honors Dr. Eliach's groundbreaking work. I want to thank the family for being willing to do this program here and for being willing to share it with a public audience. So tonight, the way the program will work is you'll hear from members of Dr. Eliach's family who will illuminate her contributions from their perspective. Then you'll see me very briefly again to introduce our speaker, Judith Cohen. So we'll really have a sense of Dr. Yaffa Eliach, both personally and also certainly in the field as a teacher, as a historian, as a researcher who made truly invaluable contributions. I want to extend warm greetings from Michael Glickman, our president and CEO, our chairman, Bruce Ratner, and the entire board of trustees. So you'll see me again shortly, but for now, I'd like us to hear from the members of Dr. Eliach's family. Thank you.
First, I thank you for coming. I appreciate that. And I'm going to read a perek b'Tehillim who evaluates a good person. מזמור לדוד. אדוני, מי יגור באוהליך, ומי ישכון בהר קודשך? הולך תמים ופועל צדק, ודובר אמת בלבבו. לא רגל על לשונו, לא עשה לרעהו רעה, וחרפה לא נשא על קרובו. נבזה בעיניו נמאס, ואת ירא אדוני יכבד. נשבע להרע ולא ימיר, כספו לא נתן בנשך, ושוחד על נקי לא לקח, עושה אלה לא ימות לעולם. לא, זה אחר כך.
Okay, thank you, Abba Rabbi Eliach, for the inspiring Tehillim. There's also going to be a poem, but Abba wants to do it at the end, so that's also something to look forward to. Good evening. Today was my mother's yortzeit, Chet Cheshvan, so it is very appropriate that the memorial is this evening. For those of you who don't know, my name is Smada Rosenzweig. I'm the daughter of Rabbi Eliach, may he be blessed with continued amazing health, and Dr. Yaffa Eliach of blessed memory. I would like to thank the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust, for hosting the second annual memorial lecture to honor my mother's seminal contribution to Holocaust research and commemoration. Thank you, President Michael Glickman, for the vision to advance Jewish memory and history. We hope to continue developing this relationship for many years to come. The earliest original interviews and artifacts from the Center for Holocaust Studies, Documentation and Research that my mother established are housed here. They form the core of the original archival resources relating to the Holocaust. My mother was a trailblazer and pioneer in ways to research and commemorate the Holocaust. Her work is well represented here in the Museum of Jewish Heritage and in the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, Israel. Thank you, Miriam Heyer, for your moving opening remarks and for all your assistance, correspondence, and organization for this event. Without your tireless efforts, we would not be here today. My mother, Dr. Yaffa Eliach, was a Holocaust survivor, historian, author, scholar, the ultimate Holocaust commemorator, poet, teacher, professor, lecturer, wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother. But in one word, she was Superwoman. During her active years, she was a larger-than-life personality. She was a devoted mother who sewed beautiful clothes for her children, embroidered, cooked, baked, took us on trips. She always set a festive table with pizzazz, flowers, and lit candles as a centerpiece. She was simultaneously glamorous and down-to-earth. She always wore that towering bun, just so. All my friends adored her. She just had it. Her enthusiasm, dynamism, and idealism were infectious. She loved people. She wanted to help them, be a part of their life. She was a mother who wove elaborate stories about her shtetl Eishishok in Israel. She was like life itself. She was a force of nature. At times, it seemed as if she had boundless energy. She loved her grandchildren and would shower them with gifts and hugs and her famous Safta cookies. My mother loved throwing parties and celebrating happy occasions. She had commissioned a stunning chuppah, wedding canopy, for the marriage of her grandchildren. She made them personalized gifts and cards for their birthdays and graduation. My mother was a very devoted wife. My father and mother were a team, a formidable team, powerhouses in their respective fields, very independent, yet also a very strong unit. They built a wonderful family together and contributed to the Jewish community together. My parents were exceptionally and fiercely dedicated to their students and institutions as well. What was unique about my mother was her ability to remain constructive and positive despite her personal harrowing experience during the Holocaust. I will just relay a few incidents to bear witness about her life. Most of the town's thousands of Jewish residents, along with most of my mother's extended family, were murdered by machine gun fire as they were forcibly assembled around massive graves that they dug themselves in the potato fields surrounding the town of Eishishok. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, 1941, the German Einsatzgruppen and their local collaborators stripped and shot all the men. On the next day, Tzom Gedalia, all the women were stripped and shot. My 6-year-old mother bore witness to this from under her non-Jewish babysitter's sweater. In 2 days, a mere 48 hours, centuries of Jewish life, love, and lore were buried with them. My mother's immediate family, the 2 parents and 3 children, survived the town massacre because my grandfather Moshe Sonnenson made plans to escape. They fled to Ghetto Radin in the nearby shtetl, but during a nightly aktion, my mother's baby brother was accidentally suffocated to death so he wouldn't cry. They escaped from there and took shelter in exchange for 60 rubles of gold a month with a petty Polish noble, Kazimierz Korkuch, a bachelor who had business dealings with my grandfather. My mother's family survived in an underground cave-like dwelling on Korkuch's estate. The AK, the Armia Krajowa, the Polish underground, which wanted to rid Poland of the Germans but also of the Jews, was suspicious of Korkuch, that he was hiding Jews, and one night in December 1942, tortured him mercilessly. Korkuch returned and tearfully told my mother's family they had to leave. They fled during a blizzard in January 1943 and hid in pigsties, potato sheds, and open forests until February 1944. By then, my grandmother Tzipora was 4 months pregnant, and they returned to Korkuch begging to let them stay, and they offered him large sums for their survival. He took them back in, and my grandmother Tzipora gave birth to a baby boy in the stable. They put the baby boy in a basket with flax and money and anonymously tied him to the eaves of a local Polish family. In July 1944, after they were liberated by the Russians, my mother's family returned to Eishishok. They retrieved the young baby, and he was circumcised in a big celebration. But their return was tainted with virulent anti-Semitism. On October 20th, 1944, riots and attacks broke out against the Jews. My grandfather, Moshe, said, "Let's jump out the windows and run for the forest." My grandmother refused. She said it would be sure death for her infant son, and she experienced that already once in Radun. She told them to leave without her, but my grandfather refused to leave. They ran up to the attic in the crawl space to hide. The mob, led by longtime neighbors who took over my grandmother's family's apothecary, found the attic door, shot my grandmother and the newborn baby. They sprayed shots wildly through the small door, but my mother Yaffa, my uncle Yitzchak, and grandfather Moshe were spared death. My grandmother's bullet-riddled body and blood fell back, covering my mother and saving her life, her brother's life, and her father's life as a last act of a mother's love. Soon after, my grandfather was taken captive and imprisoned in a hard labor camp in Siberia for well over a decade. My uncle left with the partisans, and my mother was left alone. Finally, her uncle reluctantly took her through Europe and the DP camps to British Mandate Palestine, Eretz Yisrael, and she was sent to boarding school. These events, as well as others, had a profound impact on my mother. But instead of focusing on death, destruction, and hate, my mother chose to focus on life. She pursued an excellent education to become a world-class, trailblazing, pioneering scholar. She built a family. Her optimism, idealism, and pride in being Jewish suffused everything she accomplished. She was proud to be a part of her 900-year-old Eishishok shtetl history and the Jewish people. She wanted the survivors and martyrs to be seen as heroes, not victims. People who stood up to physical, spiritual, and psychological torment and transformed that tragedy into profound creativity by moving forward and being at the forefront of world history wherever they lived in Israel or the diaspora. She symbolized the soaring power of human beings to overcome unspeakable tragedy, to embrace life and faith and hope, and to help document and heal broken souls. My mother balanced so delicately the dialectical tension between remembering the atrocities and moving forward. She wanted the world to know of the atrocities that the Nazis perpetrated against the Jews in the world, and to ensure that it would never happen again. She wanted the world to know that there were righteous people from all nationalities and ethnicities who fought evil, and to celebrate the triumph of the human spirit. As an historian and a Jew, she understood that it was essential to document the events that happened. As a person of morality and integrity, she was the world's gadfly and conscience. She felt strongly that those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. As a religious individual, she understood the centrality of spiritual resistance. One of her most famous books is Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust, which relates the spiritual heroism of Jews during the Holocaust. As a woman, she was sensitive to the stories and pivotal roles women played in Jewish life and community in cities and shtetls before the war and during the Holocaust itself. Women were the heroines in many of my mother's interviews. They were also central in the pictures she showed and the stories she told. She underscored their contributions to Jewish continuity. She empowered all her students of all ages to tell their stories, to follow their passions, and achieve their goals. My mother asked the questions, should we commemorate the Holocaust? Should we document what was destroyed? Should we remember the atrocities? To all those questions, my mother's answer was a resounding yes. The world needs to know and learn the lessons in order to be careful of dehumanizing the other. We need to remember the past in order to be able to move on to the future. A people who do not remember who they are or what happened to them will fade into the shadows and dustbins of history and lose their identity. My mother was one of the foremost Holocaust historians. She placed the Holocaust within a Jewish historical and spiritually meaningful context. Using the template presented by Dr. Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi in his work Zachor about Jewish history and memory, I will paraphrase my son Itamar Rosenzweig's penetrating insights on my mother's life's work. Jews throughout the ages were not focused on history per se, but on meaningful and impactful Jewish memory. More than any contemporary Jewish thinker, Dr. Yaffa Eliach dedicated her life to restoring and preserving Jewish memory. Her two main works continue the tradition of the authentic expression of Jewish history. One, the tradition of Sholshelet HaKabbalah, works that record the chain of tradition, and Sifrei Gzerot Ashkenaz, works that relate the crusades and atrocities committed against the Jews, but highlight the spiritual valor of Jewish individuals and communities. There once was a world, the 900-year history of the shtetl of Eishishok, was Yaffa Eliach's Sefer HaKabbalah, a work that reaches far back into Jewish history, tracing her Kabbalah, her inherited traditions and cultural ancestry. And Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust was Yaffa Eliach's contemporary Sifrei Gzerot, highlighting spiritual valor in the face of tragedy. My mother sharply observed in the introduction to her work that no genre of Western literature was equipped to confront the horrors of the Holocaust. Yaffa Eliach's Hasidic tale is perhaps the only legitimate attempt to render coherent the utter incoherence of the Holocaust. How can we make sense of it? Her life and work is nothing less than the authentic harmonization and melding of Jewish history and Jewish memory. My mother was a woman who searched for and found light in the overwhelming darkness. She signed every work, Me'at or docher bechoshech. A glimmer of light chases away all the darkness. Tehei nishmata tzura b'tzror hachayim. May her spirit and legacy shine forever.
I'm Dr. Eliach's son. My name is Yotav. In Israel, I'm Yotav. My mother, Dr. Yaffa Eliach, was a person who went through and survived the Holocaust as a child, and researched and wrote and taught about the Holocaust as an adult. She understood what the Holocaust was, not just as an academic, but as a young Jewish girl who was subject to all sorts of horrific realities and constant humiliations. My mother experienced the Holocaust. She did not just study and research it. As her son, and as someone who read her works and heard her lecture, I can say that my mother wanted people to understand that the Holocaust was unique in that the perpetrators of this atrocity gave the annihilation of the Jewish nation so much thought, planning, and effort, while investing so much time and resources to make sure that the Jewish nation would be erased. The war against the Jews, to quote Lucy Davidowitz, was clearly something separate and apart from World War II. While Nazi Germany lost World War II, they did achieve a victory in their destruction of 33% of the world's Jewry, 90% of Polish and Lithuanian Jewry, and in aggregate, close to 60% of all of European Jewry. They perpetrated the greatest evil against the Jewish nation since the destruction of Judea and the Second Temple in 70 CE. My mother, Dr. Yaffa Eliach, got the message across that the Holocaust was an unprecedented event for all the above-mentioned reasons. She was not interested in trying to enter into a contest with other aggrieved groups in the world, of which there are many, as to whom suffered more than whom in the course of their history. She was focused on people, Jews and non-Jews, understanding how unique the Holocaust was and how devastating it was to a 4,000-year-old nation, as well as what can be learned from the fact that the perpetrators of the Holocaust were none other than the Germans, who at the time were supposedly a highly civilized and cultured nation. At the same time, she realized that it is quite possible that in the not-too-distant future, and remember, She was concerned about this in the late 1960s, that there will be people, not just on the fringes of society, who will begin to question if the Holocaust really occurred, or if something did occur to the Jews during World War II, it was more in the realm of collateral damage than a targeted operation against the Jewish nation. Furthermore, she realized that there would be those who would trivialize the Holocaust by either using the term itself or the term Nazi in completely inappropriate ways that show either malice or ignorance of using these terms in a rather flippant manner. Hence, my mother, Dr. Yaffa Eliach, was the first historian to realize that the eyewitness testimony of Holocaust survivors had to be recorded, collected, and studied. These survivors would tell their stories, what happened to them and their families during this horrific period. The Holocaust and what the Nazis did to the Jews needed to be understood in a very personal way by listening to the people who went through this horrific event and their interactions with the Nazis and those who collaborated with the Nazis. Only then could a person begin to understand the true nature of the Holocaust and the people who perpetrated it. At first, these interviews were only recordings of Holocaust survivors, and soon after, they were audio-visual recordings. Her first interviewers were her students in Brooklyn College, who in the late 1960s and 1970s were overwhelmingly Jewish sons and daughters of Holocaust survivors. My mother taught them how to interview, since asking the wrong questions, or asking questions in the wrong order, or using the wrong tone of voice could cause serious psychological damage or trauma. Starting in the late 1960s, which was a mere 2 decades after the Holocaust, she began to collect these remarkable testimonies. In many cases, the interviewers, the children of the Holocaust survivors, found out things about their parents they had absolutely no inkling of. For example, that their parents were married and had a family before the Holocaust, and that these spouses and children were murdered. These stories had a profound effect on the children interviewers, as well as those who listened to and later on watched the interviews. Slowly but surely, my mother, Dr. Yaffa Eliach, collected hundreds and eventually thousands of these eyewitness interviews with Holocaust survivors. These interviews changed the entire nature of how one documents the Holocaust and how one learns and reacts to the information relayed to them using this very powerful medium. No document, or for that matter, still picture, can recreate the effect that the Holocaust had on the people who went through it. Nor could documents and pictures give over the true human dimensions of the horrors experienced and perpetrated. This form of documentation has fundamentally altered how we study and understand and relate to the Holocaust. In 1994, when the movie Schindler's List, directed by Steven Spielberg, was released, a cultural and eventually an educational shift took place in the U.S. In particular, as how to people, especially younger people and non-Jewish people, related to the Holocaust. The movie painted three-dimensional characters who went through the Holocaust in a way that most people could relate to and understand. Within a few months of the release of the movie, Steven Spielberg realized that instead of showing actors in a movie about the Holocaust, he should interview the Holocaust survivors themselves and get their testimony on file. Shortly after he began to enter the realm of Holocaust documentary making, he was told about Dr. Yaffa Eliach and her pioneering work in interviewing Holocaust survivors that began in the late 1960s. He went on to have his people contact my mother, who shared with them her insights, experiences, protocols of how one goes about interviewing Holocaust survivors. My mother and her students and the staff of the first Holocaust Studies Center founded in the U.S., that is yet another remarkable achievement of my mother that I will discuss perhaps at another time, had by 1994 interviewed 5,000 Holocaust survivors. Steven Spielberg, being a Hollywood movie director and producer, as well as a man of substantial means, using my mother's methods, was able, in the 10 to 15 years after the release of Schindler's List, to have 50,000 Holocaust survivors interviewed. In essence, thanks to my mother, There is now a vast repository of Holocaust survivor testimonies that can be found in this museum, the one in Washington, D.C., and in dozens of Holocaust museums and centers all around the world, including Yad Vashem. These interviews now make up an essential part of the documentation of the Holocaust and are also acting as a living exhibit for all those who wish to see and hear of what actually did happen to the Jews during the Holocaust. Every university that has a Holocaust Studies course or department uses these interviews as an invaluable teaching tool to help younger people understand and attempt to grasp what the Holocaust was. There was one other group of individuals that my mother, Dr. Yaffa Eliach, understood needed to be interviewed regarding the Holocaust. The soldiers who liberated the concentration camps and the death camps. Russian, American, and British soldiers and officers. For this group, predominantly non-Jewish and older than the average Holocaust survivor, had a different vantage point of the horrors and atrocities of the Holocaust. Hence, my mother realized that this group needed to be interviewed rather quickly. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, my mother, being fluent in Russian and English, was able to interview on tape and video dozens upon dozens of liberators, British, Russian, and American, ranging from regular soldiers to high-ranking officers, among them the late Senator Henry Scoop Jackson. All these testimonies add yet another dimension to the historical first-person accounts of the Holocaust. When my mother began her interviewing of survivors, she was literally mocked by Holocaust scholars of that time period. They all felt that anything other than a document or an official photo is not real scholarship at all, but actually something gimmicky and not worthy of a scholar. Well, here we are close to 50 years later, and it is clear beyond the shadow of a doubt that my mother, Dr. Yaffa Eliach's innovation when it comes to the interviewing of Holocaust survivors and liberators is one of the great scholarly tools used by scholars and lay people to study, understand, learn from, and relate to the Holocaust. Finally, I purposely only picked one of my mother's many innovations in the field of Holocaust studies because of the restraints placed on me by time. My mother was more than just a scholar innovator. She was truly a woman with a vision. Thank you all for coming this workday evening to remember a remarkable person who has literally affected the lives of millions of people. May her soul be bound up with the bounds of eternity. Tehei nishmatat tzura b'tzor hachayim.
Thank you. So we're going to transition to the part of the program where, through the work exhibited at museums, we start to understand the lasting impact of Dr. Yaffa Eliach's work. So I mentioned earlier, this museum, the Museum of Jewish Heritage, is the third largest Holocaust museum in the world. We see more than 60,000 students each year, and we are currently writing the curriculum for high school and middle school teachers throughout the boroughs. So the idea that these students, both who come here to the museum and who use museum resources to learn, they are directly impacted by Dr. Yaffa Eliach's work. And we're not the only museum who has been directly impacted. So it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague Judith Cohen, who's the Director, Chief Curator of Acquisitions. I always get the title wrong. The head of acquisitions at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, who will talk about Dr. Yaffa Eliach's legacy in terms of the really hundreds of thousands of people who see the evidence of her work every year. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having me, and Birshut Harav and the rest of the family. The family, Madar and her brother, talked much better than I could about all of Yaffa's, pictures, that's what we're doing. Accomplishments, her writing, her oral history. But since I ran the photo archive at the Holocaust Museum for the past many years, what I want to talk about is one accomplishment of Yaffa, and that is her creation of the Tower of Faces. One of the hardest challenges facing any Holocaust museum is how do you show the enormity of what was lost. How can you memorialize the victims so that you're not talking about just an anonymous number of 6 million, but actually personalizing it? Because the number itself isn't enough. How do you comprehend the community, the values that was also destroyed? And this is one of the issues that Yaffa sought to resolve through creation of the Tower of Faces. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's Tower of Faces is a 54-foot tower that extends through 3 floors of our exhibition and is comprised of 1,032 photographs. Unlike other exhibits, where photographs function to illustrate the text panels, here the photographs are the text panel, and they're the architectural component as well. The tower's photographs are hung on all 4 walls, so visitors who come experience complete immersion in the town. The tower was the creation of Yaffa Eliach, and all the photos are of her shtetl, Eyshishok, or Eyshishkis, where she lived before the Holocaust consumed almost the entire town population. Visitor surveys consistently list the Tower of Faces as one of the 3 most memorable displays in the Holocaust Museum. What accounts for the power of this exhibit, and what was Yaffa's motivation for creating it? Photography was always very close to Yaffa's heart. Her grandparents, Yitzchak Uri and Alta Katz, own a photo studio above their pharmacy. And we can see his grandmother there on the right. Photos of young Yaffa Sonnensen and her immediate family are among the most engaging in the exhibit, including this photograph of 4-year-old Yaffa taken the same day the Germans entered the town, changing it forever. After discovering that no tangible reminders of the once thriving Jewish community of Eyshishok remained, Eliach became determined to rescue the community from oblivion and preserve its memory. She went on to search to gather as many photographs from the town as she could find. Many of these were taken in her grandparents' studio. The mission took her almost 15 years and brought her to 3 continents. Eventually, she amassed a collection of 6,000 photographs. And here is a small segment of a documentary that was done several years ago where Dr. Eliach describes how she collected the photos.
The intention to write this book and to do my exhibit in Washington was a very genuine one. I was in President Carter's Holocaust Commission. We were on a fact-finding mission to Eastern Europe, and I felt that my colleagues were constantly speaking about death and destruction, that they would like the museum in Washington to represent the Holocaust. And I felt that I would like the museum in Washington also to represent Jewish life and to present life before death and to give to the victims back their identity, their culture, their dynamics as human and creative people, as members of humanity. My question was, how can I do it? I really had no idea, because my colleagues kept talking about the photos from Auschwitz with people in concentration camp uniforms. They were talking about the gas chambers. We were in Auschwitz, we were in Plaszow, we were in Warsaw. And I was thinking, I would like to represent the people in a different way. And as the plane was flying from Warsaw to Kiev, I realized that somewhere below the clouds is my little town. And it is then on the plane that I made my decision to document, actually to use Eyshishok as a model of normal life, of life before death. And I chose Eyshishok.
So after Yaffa gathered up all these photographs, this huge collection, one of the exhibit researchers spent a full day looking at the photographs and came to convinced that she was correct. And this was the best way to convey Jewish life before the Holocaust. And this researcher said that more than the usual somewhat fixed and easily evoked nostalgia associated with the loss of beautiful old world traditions, it would personalize the Holocaust, connecting museum visitors to real faces of real people. According to Edward Lindenthal, author of Preserving Memory, The Struggle to Create America's Holocaust Museum, the researcher was especially interested in having the exhibit portray those murdered in ways apart from Nazi definitions, prisoner, inmate, victims, to make it clear that in Nazi Germany, the victims were not guilty of any crimes as normally defined, but were innocent people leading normal lives. And Eliach's photos offered a glimpse of people before they were classified as victims. And Yaffa concurred. In an interview conducted at the museum's opening, she said, "We have traditional symbols of the Holocaust, striped uniforms and cattle cars. Evil is easy to depict. But how do you convey the beauty of the human spirit? I didn't see them as bones and skulls, dehumanized prisoners with name, hair, or clothes. I wanted to show them going to school, skating, skiing, picking flowers." The Holocaust Museum in Washington faces unique challenges in that full 90% of our visitors, 90, are not Jewish. Not only have most never met a survivor, there are many who've never met a Jew. How then can the exhibition team explain the richness and variety of pre-war Jewish life, create immediate empathy and identification with a community that was lost in a way that neither trivializes it or over-sentimentalizes it, but at the same time is not overly academic? The problem becomes even more complex when trying to describe what's a shtetl. These small, largely Jewish towns of 1 to 20,000 inhabitants seem so far removed from our lives in the United States. For most of us, myself included, the introduction to shtetl life comes from Fiddler on the Roof, which I see they were showing today in Yiddish, and it's a loving portrayal, but it's a stereotype. And even immediately after the war, Dr. Eliach said that people didn't understand what was a shtetl, and she recounts having read a story by Mendele Mocher Svarim by her teacher, was assigned, who later became her husband, and she was bothered that Mendele Mocher Svarim, even though he's a great Jewish author, he was resorting to stereotypes. And his her classmates, these other young Israelis, came away thinking everyone in the shtetl was poor, everyone was backward. And she felt, even as a young child, you have to show something greater, that this isn't the true picture of shtetl life. At first, the Holocaust Museum wanted to limit the photos in the tower to show only photographs of people who had been murdered. But Dr. Eliach vetoed this idea. She played a major role in the curation of the exhibition to assure that visitors got a sense of the entire town as it once was. She selected photographs from as many different families as she could find, and she even made sure that feuding families were not placed next to each other to reflect the reality of where they would have chosen to be placed. We usually refer to the tower as the Tower of Faces, and what visitors first notice are the haunting eyes of men, women, and children staring out from every wall. Arnie Kramer, who first photographed Yaffa's collection for the Holocaust Museum, said he considers these the hardest pictures to look at the museum. For you bring a knowledge of the future to these pictures that these people didn't have. You see in their innocence, and you know their fate. However, Yaffa Eliach's preferred name was the Tower of Life, Migdal Chaim, for unlike the rest of the museum, this room shows life being lived to its fullest, before the Jews of Eishashok became victims of Hitler's savagery. Eliach said she decided to document the history of the shtetl, quote, "It was clear to me I had to bring the town back to life. I decided to write its history to remember the people through the act. I was determined that these Jews would not be remembered as victims." So as a photo archivist, I constantly try to encourage researchers to use our collection not merely for illustration, to write your book and then find a pretty picture to put on the cover, but to use the photographs themselves as historic documentation. And this requires a little more time to analyze each photograph. And as we heard earlier, Dr. Eliach was first and foremost a historian. And with that in mind, I now want to look at the Tower of Faces as a unique source of historic documentation. How can we look at these photographs to learn something about the history, sociology of the shtetl? A few caveats and cautionary words. Just as photographs are not interchangeable, not all shtetls were alike. Eyewitness had a unique history owing to its location on the Polish-Lithuanian border. During the interwar period, it was part of Poland, later became part of Lithuania. And this meant that it was shaped by its proximity to the great Lithuanian yeshivas, especially the nearby yeshiva of the Chafetz Chaim, as well as to the centers of the Hebrew Enlightenment, the Haskalah. Unlike other shtetls in southern Galicia, there were very few Hasidim and a disproportionate large number of speakers of modern Hebrew. And a second caveat, though Yaffa's collection is amazingly comprehensive, there are limits to what we can learn just from photographs. And studying any photo collection in a vacuum can be misleading. For example, Eyewitness was a very religious community known for its yeshiva. Yet there, in terms of the population, I'd say disproportionately fewer photos of religious Jews. And that has to do both with tzniut, with modesty, and also that most religious ceremonies occur on holidays when you can't photograph it according to halakha. So you get a little bit of a secular religious, I'd say, imbalance. And then the second issue is that you also get a socioeconomic imbalance. If you were really impoverished, you'd be less likely to go to a photo studio. So there's certain people whose pictures don't appear as readily. Having said that, it's amazing how much we can learn just by looking at this incredible photo collection. There are photos of the town itself, of street scenes and businesses. There are photos of parties, both of children and adults. There are photos of people at work. Part of the visitors' attraction to the Tower of Faces is that they see people doing the same activities they do in daily life here in the United States, such as swimming or playing in the snow. Visitors can immediately identify with the photographs as they look at young girls taking ballet lessons, young people going for a bicycle ride, or even sneaking a smoke. The photos don't look exotic, but strangely familiar. And one visitor commented, "When I look at the wall of pictures, I feel as if they're my family. It could happen anywhere to anyone." Yaffa Eliach's collection documents all major life cycle events, to include marriages, bar mitzvahs, and even funerals. And it's interesting with funerals because that's one tradition that we say is fixed, that this is the way you do things, and people don't realize the variety in funeral traditions until you look at some of these photos and see that they're actually quite different than what we do now. This particular photograph is actually of the Chafetz Chaim's funeral in Radon, in the next town. Many of the photographs illustrate the progression to modernity as the advances of the 20th century reached Eyewitness. True, there are photos of horse-drawn carriages, but there's also one of a bus, and even one of the first automobiles. They had the automobile before they had the roads that could support the automobile, so it had some problems getting off the ground. There's even a photograph of the first electric power station. Now, this is a remarkable thing. I certainly don't have a picture of a power station in my family album, and I guess is that most of you don't either. So it shows the importance for the people that they were being introduced to the electric grid for the first time, and hence we have this photograph of the opening of the first electric power station in Eyewitness. Modernity was sometimes accompanied by secularization, and you can see this in portraits of multi-generation families, from the way the grandfathers dressed to the businessmen to the younger woman in a sleeveless shirt. As changes in dress change with each generation. Eyewitness was a very small shtetl, even by shtetl standards. A 1931 census says there were less than 3,000 people living in the town, of these mostly Jews. However, when looking at the tower, we're immediately struck by the variety within one community. Not only the variety of dress, which might be more trivial, but also of political affiliations. The collection documents a huge number of social clubs, fraternal organizations, and welfare societies, each with its own ideology. It was a hubbub of Zionist activity. They're photos not of one Zionist movement, but of many Zionist movements, from the right-wing Beitar, over on the right, to the left-wing Shomer Tzayir, Shomer Dati. Besides Zionists, there were members of other political movements, and the turbulence of the 1930s made its way to Eyewitness. Socialists, Bundists, communists, and this is a land redistribution ceremony after the Soviets took over, led by a Jewish woman. Eyewitness was the center of the linguistic battles going on within the Jewish community. There was a Yiddish library. There was a Yiddish-speaking school. These were mostly favored by the Bundists. At the same time, as we said before, it was the center of the Hebrew Haskalah, Hebrew libraries, Hebrew schools, Tarbut schools that taught everything, Ivrit B'Ivrit, including secular subjects. And as we said, Eyewitness was known, especially earlier, for its yeshiva. And alongside the Tarbut schools and the other schools, there still was Talmud Torah, and the yeshiva continued to function, though we have fewer photos of them. Despite the strong appeal of Zionism, Eyewitness was simultaneously integrated in the greater Polish nation. Young men served in the Polish army. That's conscription, but this man over here, Benjamin Kabachnik, was a Polish patriot. He became an officer and tragically was killed by members of the Polish army that he had previously served with. Some children chose to attend mixed Polish, Christian Jewish schools taught in the Polish language instead of in either Hebrew or Yiddish because they thought it would help their educational opportunities or their economic opportunities in the future. And to my mind, one of the oddest photographs in the tower is this picture here. There's an ice cream stand on the bottom and a welcoming sign on the archway. And one of my colleagues blew up the arch on top. And what's weird about it, bless you when you come and when you leave. But the odd thing is if you look on one side, there's the Polish eagle, and on the other side is a Magen David. So it's the Polish and the Jewish together, and the reason this whole structure was erected is even odder, and it was to welcome the arrival of a Polish Catholic cleric who was visiting Eyewitness. The Jews of Eyewitness interacted not only with their immediate community, with the Polish nation, but they were also integrated into the world. People sometimes think that globalization is a word that was invented in the 21st century. When we see this photo of Mickey Mouse courting one of the young women, we see that the Jews of Eyewitness were aware of what was going on in the greater world. They weren't isolated. And this can be then shown with the changing population. Eyewitness was dynamic. There were people coming in and going out, especially as they moved to Palestine the United States, also South Africa and South America. Between 1873 and 1940, Ashishkins, about 1,500 Ashishkins immigrated to the United States alone, many more to Palestine. And there were also people fleeing central Poland coming through Eyjashok in the other direction. And many of the photos in the tower and in Yaffa's collection show going away parties and photos here of people settling into their new lives abroad. And during periods of economic deprivation, these emigres played a crucial life supporting the community back behind. This photograph was taken here in New York, and it's of a Landsmannschaft of Eyjashok emigres who gathered together for social gatherings in the United States, in New York, for the purpose of raising money to send back and support the community. However, contrary to what a lot of us think, I know when I took Jewish history, I was told that unlike other immigrant groups, Jews came and they stayed, whereas other immigrant groups, they'd come and they'd go. But that's not the whole truth. Jews also went back, and in fact, Yaffa's grandfather came to the United States. He tried it out. He decided it wasn't for him. He went back to Eyjashok, bringing with him the photo equipment that became the photo equipment that was used in their studio. This photograph, which visitors love and always look at, is actually not somebody who was born in Eyjashok. It's an American girl. Her name's Rosalind Foster, but her grandmother was from Eyjashok, and she came back for a visit. So there was this constant going back and forth. There was a dynamism, both politically, religiously, linguistically, and also demographically. So what happened to Eyjashok? Smadar told us of the tragic end, that between the Einsatzgruppen and the later Aktion of the Yakav, the Army of Craiova, no Jews survive today. There were Jews who came back after the war. However, Yaffa Eliach was determined that the town would be remembered for its vibrancy, for the photos that we've seen, not for its death and its tragic end. It's been said that the tower is a powerful space because life is present there, in marked contrast to the overwhelming presence of death in the rest of our museum. So we said the term shtetl is both close and elusive. We all hear the term shtetl, few of us really comprehend it. And the question is, did Dr. Eliach succeed in making it understandable? And I want to end with a short clip of an interview of a child of an Ashishkin. And you can see that absolutely the tower did everything she wanted it to do. And this man, as you'll hear in a minute, said he always heard stories about Eyjashok, but couldn't begin to imagine what it was until he stepped into the tower.
And then with his sisters, what did it add to your understanding of your father, who the sole survivor of the entire family, and always keeps in touch with everybody from Eyjashok and always speaks about Eyjashok, but actually seeing everybody? What did it mean to you in seeing him as a young man?
The greatest challenge of being a child of someone from Eyjashok is the biggest challenge being a child of a survivor is trying to make the abstraction of Eyjashok and the abstraction of the Holocaust real. That's always been the most difficult thing for me. How can I make this real to me? I have a need to do that. Coming here today, thanks to you, by the way, Yaffa, and others like you, has helped me in that process. Seeing photographs, and by the way, some color photographs. The Holocaust is a very black and white event. Coming here makes it more real simply because there are color photos and color videos. It has helped me understand that Eyjashok was a real place with real schools and real people and real children who had real everyday lives. I've never been able to really grasp that in a way that I have been able to today.
And with that, we feel that the Tower of Faces really is a tower of life, and thanks to Yaffa Eliach, she's made this world come alive, not only for the curators, but for all our visitors as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, my father, Rabbi Eliach, is going to read his poem that is going to finish the program.
פתחנו בלשון העברית ונסיים בשפה העברית. זה שיר שכתבתי אחרי מותה של יפה. שובי אליי כי רחקת ממני, אבדו לך זיכרונות וצללת בלב שכחה. הדמיון היה למציאות, והמציאות חלום, והחלום לתקווה, והתקווה בשמי מרום. היית בהרי הערים, אמרת לשמי שמיים, היית נס ודגל לתקוות המיואשים. ובאו שלדי שואה, ויצאו במחול הקלטון, לסחרר שבילי המוח, ולמחוק כתבי זיכרון. כל פלאי הניצחונות במגדל האקדמיה, על גבורה שבסבל ועל סבל שבגבורה. ואת, הביטחון באמונה, ניצוצות התקווה, שערי האורות ומסורת הדורות, צמחו ועשו פרי, הפיצו רוח הפלי, ואשר הקשיבו לקולך, היה לרוח הולך. קומי, התעוררי, ממעמקים מתפללי, ליודע מחשבות וזוכר נשכחות. אולי האל יעשה חסד עם גיבורת החיל בעלת שם. אולי המקום ירחם, והיה למנחם.
Okay, what a way to end the program. We are going to have refreshments outside in the vestibule, so everyone is invited to participate and for us all to have a chance to speak with each other. Thank you very much for coming to the program.